That's Stacey Blackwood. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is Strength and Conditioning. We'll just skip the part where we're wearing the same shirt. We would probably make that kind of a big thing to do normally, but a lot of Alabama fans want to hear about Caleb Cunningham, 5-star wide receiver, has flipped to Ole Miss. We'll just go ahead and dive right into it. Stacey, kind of what's your reaction to that news?
Well, obviously, this has kind of been in the works over the past few days. Some, people on social media were dropping hints that this could potentially happen. And being a Mississippi kid, not too surprising. It's hard to pull the top notch talent from the state of Mississippi. And Cunningham's a great player. It's obviously a big blow to the class, but the good news is this was not going to be a heavy wide receiver class for Alabama, anyways. I believe every wide receiver on the roster right now can actually return in 2025. So it wasn't going to be a heavy class. They have lots here, Brooks. I don't want to diminish what losing Cunningham, does for this class, but there was some margin for error when it comes to not landing a top ranked receiver. You still have some young, talented players in that room if you're Alabama, but he's a great player. He'll do great things in Lane Kiffin's offense. And it's not too surprising because, like we mentioned, it's been in the works for the past few days, and it's officially flip season with the early signing period. Really, it's National Signing Day coming up here in a few weeks next month. So, not surprising. It hurts the class a little bit, but it's not the end of the world for Alabama.
Yeah, it certainly hurts like the rankings and all that stuff. I mean, and that's something that fans care about. I mean, obviously, being number one for all those consecutive classes, Caleb DeBoer, first full class, people, what kind of message would it send for him to be number one or number two or whatever? And it's still possible. Flip season goes both ways. And I also want to point out that, until a guy signs, as we've learned with many of these guys, you never know what can happen. But what we're here more so to talk about is kind of what it means to the 2025 class, kind of what it means to the 2025 roster, which I think is the most important thing. And, it's kind of like you said, when you look at what Alabama got, the fact that Caleb Odom is playing receiver and not tight end. You look at everybody that they added as far as, Ron Williams, which I think that was a huge part of this. Like just knowing that he's a true freshman, he's going to be the alpha number one. He's a young freshman too. Not going to mention his age. We've done that enough. Everybody knows by now. But, the expectation is he's going to be Alabama's alpha number one receiver in 2025, 2026. And so, we've seen plenty of offenses where two guys can coincide. So it's not like, because this isn't a quarterback situation where it's just one player on the field, or even, a running back where it's just one on the field typically at a time, and you kind of got to split workloads and things like that. As far as targets and stuff, sure. But as far as workload, snap counts, things like that, I mean, you saw the ride outs. I mean, there was 4 of them, and all of them ended up being first-round picks. You've seen it at other places too. You saw John Mechie, you saw Jameson Williams, you saw DK Metcalf, AJ Brown at Ole Miss. I mean, just the list. I mean, we could come up with 1,000 different wide receiver combinations. So it's not like that was the only factor, but kind of the Trey Harris, Ole Miss treatment, kind of how he's there far and away their number one option when healthy. I think that was appealing. I think playing in Lane Kiffin's offense was appealing. Obviously, playing in Caleb DeBoer's is appealing as well. So that's not to say anything about that, but it's an NIL era too. Money is always going to be involved, and so that's something else that you got to talk about in the in-state stuff for Cunningham. That plays a role, but I want you to think about some of the guys that are going to be that we think is going to be coming back. Now, granted, it's a transfer portal era, but I don't think Jeremy Bernard has really done enough to solidify himself as an early round draft pick. I think in this offense, being a starter, wouldn't be shocked at all if he was back next year. Ron Williams, the other top receiver, expected to be back next year, obviously. But you talk about guys like Kendrick Law. He's been kind of the number 3 guy when he's been healthy. Definitely has not had the kind of production to warrant, early entrant to the NFL. Some people might speculate as far as transfer portal. We're not here to do that. But what I will say is that he's been a huge part of the offense. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he's back. But then you got guys like Jalen Hell, who was supposed to be a true sophomore this year. He was supposed to be a massive part of the offense, and he ends up getting hurt. And so he's been out for this entire season. He'll be a redshirt sophomore next year, along with, Ryan Williams being a sophomore, along with Cole Adams being a redshirt sophomore. Caleb Odom will be a sophomore. You got to think they'll want to get him more involved, at the very least next season. But then you got guys like Rico Scott and Bubba Hampton and Amari Jefferson, really loaded class last year. You got Emmanuel Henderson, who's a veteran guy. Kobe Prentice can technically be back. So, there are plenty of options, and it's not just options, like it's high-end guys. And one thing that we've also seen from Kalen DeBoer, Jamarcus Shepard, and, what they did at Washington is the development side of things. So not only do you have talent, but you have to trust the development too. And I think Alabama's got a really good combination of talent and guys who can get the most out of that talent.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what makes this loss of Cunningham not as significant as it potentially could be if you're looking at a room that's losing, 3 to 5 plus contributors from this year. So I think about guys like Jaron Hamilton. I think about Bubba Hampton, who are way down the depth chart as true freshmen this year. And in this era of the transfer portal, what does it mean for those guys? So with guys like Jeremy Bernard coming back, most likely, in my opinion, I think that's what he should do. Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, of course, Ryan Williams is going to be back. Caleb Odom, who has really established himself as, if you look at the snap counts, he is, I guess you would consider him a starter when they're, running 4 wide out there or 5 wide. He's playing with the first team. So he's kind of moved ahead of some of the other freshmen. So that part of it is going to be interesting to see how Coach Shepard and Coach DeBoer kind of talk these guys, because I'm sure they're kind of banking on some guys returning next year with them not taking as many wide receivers in the class of 2025. So they're probably banking on several guys returning, some of their key contributors, also some of those younger players, like you mentioned, so they can develop them in this system, learn this system, not have to get out there and play like Ryan Williams is right away, and learn in this system at this level of competition. So losing Cunningham, while I think it affects like you said, more of what the class looks like in 2025, not so it hurts the class ranking more than I think it hurts the actual roster moving forward. Obviously, anytime you can add a 5-star wide receiver, you would like to do that. But the fact that Alabama does have potentially a lot of experience returning and a lot of talent that's already on the roster that's, kind of waiting in the background, it makes this loss a little bit less, important. And I'll say this, Lotzier Brooks is committed, and he's the most underrated player in this class, in my opinion, regardless of position. You watch his tape, and he is a playmaker. I know he's small. He plays up in Jersey, but, dude, that kid can play. I would take him over just about any other wide receiver in this class just from a playmaker standpoint. So it's important to remember that he's a part of this class as well at the moment. So while losing Cunningham is a big loss from a ranking standpoint, when you look ahead to what the roster is still going to look like in 2025, most likely you can kind of start to patch up that wound, to put a Band-Aid on it a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think you talk about kind of some of the guys who have been successful in Kalen DeBoer's offense, and we talk about Rome Odunze quite a bit, kind of that bigger bodied X style of receiver. And Caleb Cunningham has that ability. He's really strong at the catch point. He can win the 50-50 balls. He's got a basketball background. But, when you really look at some of the other guys that Alabama has on this roster, like getting Jalen Hill back, he's got some ball winning ability. Ryan Williams, even for being an undersized receiver like he is as far as weight, he's got some ball winning ability, but he's also that game breaker, dynamic presence. He's going to continue to grow and develop as far as the route running. He's kind of a, he can win at all 3 levels of the field. And so, you look at some of the different combinations. Caleb Odom is that big bodied mismatch X style of receiver. It's so when you look at the collective group, it's like you have really, when you think about it in the traditional terms, the X's, the Z's are going to be the guys that are lined up off the line of scrimmage. They're going to be going in motion, very versatile player. A lot of your jets are going to those types of guys. And then you got your slots. I think Alabama is in pretty good shape with all three. And like you said with Brooks, I mean, this is a guy who kind of lines up all over the place for his high school team. He gets handoffs, he gets screens. They line him up in the backfield in the slot. They put him out on the perimeter. Really strong receiver for a guy his size. I want to say he squats something like 400 pounds. But he's got that ability to be like a 3-level separator. And originally, when I was watching him and kind of the dynamic playmaking ability that he had, I was originally reminded of Jalen Waddle in some ways. And I always try to refer it to, Bama players because Bama fans are familiar with those guys. If I don't have a Bama comp that I can at least make work, I'll go somewhere else and I'll try to explain what I mean. And hopefully enough people understand it. But, Jalen Waddle was initially the guy. But then when you start looking at him more and just the top end speed that he has, I want to say like he reached like over 22 miles per hour last season was his max speed, which is up there, with the max speed of the top guys in the NFL, both this season, last season. Like when you go look, I think it was like 22.1 miles per hour. That would put him in like the top 3 to 5 on the NFL level as well. So definitely has the vertical speed, very kind of easy glider as far as watching him run. Would definitely be like an excellent option in an RPO quick slant offense where he's going to be able to do that yak stuff, kind of like the ride outs. And so the more I've watched him, the more I see like a Henry Ruggs type. And it's not picture perfect, but there's enough there where I 100% agree with you. On 3 has Brooks, I think, rated just outside of the top 100. I think he's a top 100 player. Everybody else, other recruiting services, for whatever reason, they've got him as a 3-star player. I don't agree with that at all. He's a dynamic receiver. I think he's an excellent get for Alabama, an underrated get. But when you combine him on top of everything else that they have or we expect them to have, they're going to have options and they're going to have experienced options. Like from last year, you lose Jermaine Burton, you lose Isaiah Bond, you lose kind of, really a tight end, but also kind of, that mismatch big body receiver and Amari Niblack. This year, you're expecting to get your top 2 guys back and really, you start working down just your wide receiver depth, and it's possible that you could get pretty much, you can get everybody back. You won't.
Right.
I guarantee there will be some guys who, choose to leave for one reason or another, but this is a really good group, Stacey.
It really is. And I think it could be a strength of the team next year looking ahead if guys like Jeremy Bernard and obviously Ryan Williams, Kobe Prentice, Kendrick Law, if those 4 guys come back, I think along with some of the younger players that are still developing, you get a Jalen Hill back from injury, a Cole Adams back from injury, who was, starting to be a part of the offense this season as well. Along with Lotsier Brooks and some of the freshmen that are kind of redshirting this year, Caleb Odom, you're looking at what could be a strength of this team when you could potentially be breaking in a new quarterback, depending on what Jalen Milroe decides to do. So despite losing Cunningham, I think that's a position group that Tide fans need to be excited about in 2025 because it could be a strength of the team. You have, like you mentioned, kind of a variety of playmakers. You have Jeremy Bernard, who's kind of a really physical top player, but he's got some good speed. He can beat you over the top. You have Ryan Williams, who can make plays just wherever he is handed the ball, he can make a play. You couple that with a big body of Caleb Odom, a big body in Jalen Hill, who's going to high point the football and make plays in the red zone for you most likely. So I like what this group can do in 2025. Despite not having that 5-star Caleb Cunningham, I think you need to be excited about what that room could look like next season.
Well, and I think that this plays into it, right? When you look at what Ole Miss is going to be losing
right
at that position, it's not just Ryan Williams. Really, it's the entire wide receiver room.
Right.
Like, and here's the thing. I already think it's one of the strongest position groups on the roster. I just don't think Alabama's offense currently, no offense to Jalen Milroe, but because of his legs, like you put more of an emphasis on that. You're trying to have a couple of running backs involved because they deserve to be involved. You're trying to get them at least 20 touches collectively a game. You're getting Jalen Milroe, double-digit carries a game. And so there's only you only had 18 pass attempts against LSU and you won 42-13. So, I mean, you really didn't need to throw the football a whole lot. But, I don't think that the fact that they only threw the ball 18 times was any sort of reflection or a product of the wide receiver room lacking in any sort of way. I would say that right now they are ready to be a really, really good group. And here's the other part that people don't understand. I'm going to say this once again, only because it is very relevant. Ryan Williams is a freshman. So what you are seeing now is not going to be what you're going to be seeing a year from now, which is going to be a completely different player who's more consistent, who's more complete, and he is going to be a complete nightmare. So he's going to be your alpha number one. You're going to be able to have a really reliable, experienced number two with Burton, or excuse me, I keep wanting to say Jermaine Burton, Jeremy Bernard. And you're going to have the other guys who kind of fit in around that. And I think you end up, assuming you keep Kendrick Law, which hopefully, he understands what you're going to be seeing moving forward in years 2 and 3 and beyond under Caleb DeBoer and company is probably going to look a little bit different than this transitional period right now. But there are going to be more opportunities for you in the fact that you've got such a big role as far as the jets. That's starting to become a bigger thing. The blocking ability. You look at a guy like Caleb Odom, the fact that he's going to be that situational mismatch, red zone, problem in the future. You talk about Jalen Hill and him getting involved. Cole Adams being kind of a pure slot option. He can play outside too, but you kind of look at him as like the reliable, more athletic, more dynamic version of a Slade Bolden. Kind of an underneath guy who can do more as far as the intermediate to deep parts of the field than you would realize. And then you start talking about all these guys that we've already mentioned. I mean, it's just like I said, and Emmanuel Henderson's one that we haven't even talked about. He's shown flashes. He was open against LSU and just couldn't connect with Jalen Milroe. Like they have some really, really good options moving forward. Fans are going to say, okay, what about beyond 2025? The idea of Ryan Williams and Caleb Cunningham in like 2026, probably, with Ryan Williams being a junior, that would have been incredible. But really, you're going to have plenty of time. If there are any holes for whatever reason, that's what the transfer portal's for. I guarantee you, transfer receivers are going to want to play in the, look at Steve Sarkisian's offense, look at Lane Kiffin's offense. Caleb DeBoer, at a place like Alabama, one of the premier programs with one of the premier offensive minds, they're going to want to play in a Caleb DeBoer offense as well. So it's going to be a destination where if you ever need to go to the portal for whatever reason, you're going to be able to get strong options as far as playmakers and receivers, one where you can get immediate production out of some of those guys. But and really you just got to look at the fact of you don't have to worry about a lot of these highly talented guys who have been recruited. You don't have to worry about the developmental side of things as much because unlike the last few years, Jamarcus Shepard is one of the best developers of talent as any, position coach on Alabama's roster.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I'm glad you brought up the portal because that's where I was going to go next is if this coaching staff feels like, hey, maybe we're losing more guys than what we probably thought. Maybe some of these guys are not developing the way we thought they might. The portal is always there and it can kind of, I don't want to say bail you out, but it's almost there. It can bail you out if you're in a bind and you feel like you need some extra playmakers out wide. So in this new era of the transfer portal, of NIL, it kind of helps you when you lose some talent like a Caleb Cunningham, which, like you mentioned, it's not over yet. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to not sign with Ole Miss, but until he signs, it's not over. So that's also important to remember. But there is some options still at the high school level that this coaching staff is looking at too. I think we probably need to bring that up as well. What's his name? Montgomery. I forget his first name. He's going to be on campus this weekend. A current Florida commit. Almost kind of built like Ryan Williams at 6 foot, real slender, 165 pounds. Pretty athletic kid. Hadn't really dove a lot into his tape yet, but so there's other options for this coaching staff as well. They're ahead of the curve on this. This is probably not a surprise to them. I'm sure they've known for some time that Cunningham was at least flirting with Ole Miss and potentially even other schools. So the staff is not caught by surprise here. The high school, there's still high school prospects out there. The transfer portal is still there if they get in a bind, and they can find some playmakers in different avenues. So no need to hit the panic button or anything. And like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, flip season works both ways. So there's no telling what could happen between now and signing day next month. So don't hit the panic button just yet.
Yeah, the guy you were referring to, Nashawn Montgomery, from Florida, current Florida commitment, and he's a good player. He's not ranked as high. He's ranked, I want to say, just outside the top 250 according to On3, but he's in the On300 rankings. He's one of those guys that some services have him as a 4-star, others have him as a 3-star. But you knew that the coaching staff saw the writing on the wall when they started pursuing guys like Montgomery a lot more. And so, but really, when you're looking at like a Cunningham Brooks combination, it's like, man, you got the bona fide elite talent that everybody is acknowledging as being elite, and then you got this kind of guy who should be rated a lot higher that everybody's sleeping on. So you really view it, as you're adding kind of two, elite caliber guys in some ways, and you lose kind of that bona fide 5-star, and really when Brooks was kind of your number 2 of that duo, it's like that's really considered good. But then from a fan's perspective, it's like, okay, why are these other places not higher on him? You don't feel as good about it. It's still more projection, right? Because all these guys who do this for a living and are evaluating these recruits, they don't rank him as such. But I'm here to tell you, I've watched a lot of guys, and I trust Charles Power with On3 more than anybody in the recruiting industry as far as prospect evaluation. Doesn't mean that he can't miss, but he was, I remember the guy that I was super high on, Jahad Campbell, when he was coming out. Charles and On3 had him as the number 3 overall player. Others weren't nearly as high on him. Now, some fans might argue, has he lived up to being the number 3? Well, to me, he's playing a position that's lost some value as far as the off-ball linebacker. Now, his versatility makes up for that. He can do more for you. But he is, to me, he's one of the best linebackers in the country. That's going to be reflected if he elects to come out into the NFL draft. And so being able to peg him as that guy or one of those guys, I think speaks volumes for Power and what he's able to do as far as, that stuff. And he's really high on Brooks, and I'm right there with him. Sometimes I turn on the tape and I'm like, I probably would trust your evaluation on the high school level more than I would my own, but I don't agree. And there's been some times where I've been wrong on that and he's been right. But on this one, Brooks is a guy that I watch, and I feel very confident that where On3 has him currently is where he needs to be. In fact, I probably would have him a little bit higher than that, but they're right there. I mean, I would probably have him just inside the top 100, probably like a 90, 91. Now, granted, I'm not evaluating all these other guys too. Right. I'm talking about based off of past classes where certain guys have kind of checked in for both, where other, like a Kendrick Law being listed as an athlete when he was coming out, and he was kind of in that 90 range. That I feel like from a prospect standpoint, they're not the same player by any means, not even close actually. But what I'm saying is I feel like that talent level, I feel like he's a 90s guy. I feel like he's an 80s guy. I feel he's a 5-star. He's a top 10 player. So that's when, I can't tell you where he would be in my rankings because I haven't looked at all these different players, but I just, I kind of have a feel from what I'm seeing on tape compared to past people where they were ranked. Okay, I put him in this kind of category. So that's kind of how I'd put it. So you got anything else before we hop out of here?
No, I think we hit everything pretty good. I think that the most important thing to remember is that the wide receiver class in 2025 was not going to be a major point of emphasis anyways. Not to downplay the impact of losing Cunningham to Ole Miss at all, but it's not the end of the world for this signing class because Lotsier Brooks is a great player, and this staff, I trust Jamarcus Shepard as much as anybody else on the staff. So whoever he looks to replace Cunningham in this class is going to be a good player.
That's a great way to put it. With the Jamarcus Shepard factor to me is I feel like guys who are rated as a 3-star have a really good chance of becoming a good 4-star. I think
Yeah.
guys who are rated as a lower 4-star have a really good chance to be, end up being developed into a top 100 caliber player. The guys who are top 100 caliber receivers, I have a lot of confidence in Jamarcus Shepard turning those guys into 5-star caliber players. You know what I'm saying? So that is such an interesting aspect of this. Like, Alabama has recruited the wide receiver position extremely well the last few years. Like, you look back to that Kobe Prentice, Kendrick Law, all those different guys. I mean, they had like 4 or 5 different top 100 receivers in that class. Just didn't get the development that you needed out of them. Ja'Cory Brooks, 5-star player, did some really good things for Alabama at various points, but never developed into that 5-star caliber receiver. Kind of is doing that at Louisville a little bit more, but at Alabama, he never became that guy. That was a lack of development, in my opinion. And I think that Jamarcus Shepard solves or fixes a lot of that. So that's where I think fans need to be focusing. Stacey, I appreciate you taking the time to hop on here with me. Hopefully, any fans who are freaking out, maybe this could alleviate some of those concerns. And it's how I really feel. Now, we're going to come on here and we're going to, I think there's a little bit of, I wouldn't say bias, but you're looking at it through, an optimistic lens. But truly, I have felt really good about the wide receiver room. I will continue to feel good about the wide receiver room as long as there's some sort of mass exodus like there was in the secondary last year at corner or something. I'll continue to feel good about it. There's a lot of really good options. Love the combination of skill sets. But brother, I appreciate you hopping on here with me, and we will do this again soon.
Sounds good.